ever felt like you're running on empty? You're chasing success, but feel like you're hitting that proverbial brick wall? And here are the 3 things you need to know about burnout. So let's rewind the clock a bit. In my story, I was working for investment banks, the big ones, Goldman Sachs, Barclays Capital, ING, Deutsche Bank, the lot. And got to a point where I was consulting for a big bank in Amsterdam, consulting for them, and then had to deal with all the stresses that came with that. So, which is usual, it's the long hours of working, it is the constant stress and pressure of dealing both with a dual reporting line of a CEO and a client who both are pushing their agendas, and then international travel, having also the imposter syndrome of, am I good enough to do this? And all of that perpetuated on a 12-month-long contract created that thing for me to fall into burnout. Now, that word is something that I did not actually even know was a thing. So we're talking 8 years ago. Burnout wasn't a common phrase. It was mostly used only in Amsterdam. So some of the people there used the phrase of burnout. I was definitely not familiar with that from the UK, and was looking at just how does this work? And I did not know that I was falling prey to this burnout. So that's why I want to share these 3 things with you so that you do not fall prey to it, and that you can have that awareness which would allow you to change, because that's the thing that we need for change, is that awareness. So here you go. Firstly, one of the most important things to know about burnout is the signs. So being able to recognize the signs is one of the most important aspects. So looking at chronic fatigue, so not just a fleeting sense of tiredness or stress, it is a chronic state of physical and emotional exhaustion. And then look out for the decline in performance despite your best efforts. So I was working even longer hours towards the end, and I just thought that I was getting worse, or that I wasn't good enough anymore. But I was trying to reach the same levels as what I had within the first 3 months, but it was taking me so much longer. And to my self-assessment, it also wasn't even as good. So have a look at those. And then obviously, as with anything related to mental or physical health, it can happen to anyone, regardless of your age, your position, your background, how disciplined or how strong you are. It is something that can reach us all. So that's why it's really important to be able to identify the signs of it. So there you have it. That's number 1. The second is the importance of self-care. So when I went through that journey, I was isolating myself because I didn't really have enough time. I had this beautiful apartment in Amsterdam, one of those old classics with the beams on the roof. I had a schmeg fridge, a lovely table. It was, I think it was 90 squares only for me. So it was fantastic, great entertainment ground, everything. But I never had people over because I was exhausted. I also didn't want to have people necessarily in my space because that took up energy for me to go. But the other thing was I was working so much that I didn't have time really to engage with other people, to get other people in my space and being able to build those relationships in a new country. Now, that's also something to look out for. But one of the biggest things was then I didn't apply the self-care that was needed. So as part of self-care, relationships comes into play. So those ones that are uplifting and upbuilding. But it is also to know that you are prioritizing those activities that bring you joy, that bring you the relaxation that is required. And of course, that sense of fulfillment. Now, if you get that from people, then that's something that is also required. And then the things that are really, really, really important, and not only for burnout, but for everything else in our lives, is sleep. So you need to ensure that you get enough sleep, so that's 7 to 9 hours per day. You need to maintain the healthy diet, ensure that you are hydrating. I was literally just finished up coaching with another client of mine who said that she's been chronically dehydrated for her entire life, and she was 44 years old. She's never had more than 1 liter of water, where she needed, for her height and her weight, 2.2 liters per day. So she started drinking that, had so much more energy, and was able to actually approach things with a bit more of a logical approach as well. And then incorporate regular breaks into your routines. The Pomodoro technique or timing system also works well, where you work for a certain period of time and then cut yourself off for a break. That is perfect. Whichever techniques you use to be able to help you to break as many times as is needed and is possible, that is one of the best things that you can do, just to reset the mind and to provide that care that is needed. So that is number 2. Number 3, to set and respect boundaries. Now, this is probably one of the most pertinent aspects that I did not apply in my journey during my consultation period. I allowed for scope creep, for things that were coming in and into my workload without batting them. So I did obviously some things, but not everything that was required. And then also didn't have specific boundaries with the clients in terms of manipulation and control. And then also with regards to the CEO, same thing with the manipulation side and control. So those are 2 aspects that can bring burnout very quickly. If you have that from a workplace as a continuous stressor where there is manipulation and control, that will definitely lead to not great mental health and can possibly lead to burnout. Now, that's interesting because the WHO changed their definition recently of burnout, which put the onus on the employer. So it says that it's a constant level of stress that is not mitigated by the employer. I'm paraphrasing. And that is also important to note, because when I had burnout, I thought I was at fault and I wasn't strong enough, where actually it's got nothing to do with our personal strength or discipline or anything like that, but does have to do with the stresses that we are allowing in and that we are facing. And that often comes from the increased stress that we perceive from management or from our peers. And that's why it's so important to always have that open dialogue with our management and peers when possible. So establish those clear boundaries between work and personal life to avoid overcommitment and feeling overwhelmed. It always reminds me of a friend of mine that I had many, many years ago who used to overcommit to her appointments. So she didn't want to say no to anyone. So she got invited to multiple parties and said yes to everyone. Now, obviously, you can imagine that that does not sit well if you only have a finite amount of time and you committed to 3 different parties, for instance. So rather get to the point where you can say no and actually act on your yes. So that will also allow you not to feel overwhelmed, because if you overcommitted, then it's going to lead to that point where you feel that you cannot reach the target, obviously. So make it easy for yourself and do not overcommit. Then learn to say no when necessary and communicate your limits in order to do so. That's exactly what I was trying to explain now with that example. Rather say no and don't overcommit. And also, if you say yes and there is a condition or a limitation attached, clearly communicate that. Everyone appreciates a clear communicator and someone that will give them the heads up front, rather than to get to the end of a project or of a personal discussion or a personal commitment and then realize that that person hasn't been completely frank or upfront with them. Lastly, to recognize that setting boundaries, it's not selfish. It's in fact crucial. Crucial for you and for the people around you. And this is for maintaining your mental and emotional well-being, but it's also to be able to allow that for those around you. Because if you are stable and if you are able to maintain your boundaries and dignity and your integrity, then that automatically transfers to those that are closest to you, and they can benefit from that. So it's definitely not selfish. So remember, identifying burnout is something that you can now do. And if you can identify that early, that means that puts you one step ahead of those around you. And if you prioritize self-care on top of that and have healthy boundaries, that would help you to prevent and manage any time to be able to get burnout or to be able to prevent burnout. And yes, if you are, however, at that point where you recognize the signs and symptoms and you feel that you are continuously going through this process, then do seek support from your friends or family. If they cannot help, then do seek from someone professional, like a coach like me, or from a therapist or another professional. But it is important that you reach out to someone and allow yourself the best chances of recovery. I look forward to chatting with you on the next video. If you have any questions, just drop them down in the comments and I'll be happy to get back to you.